Well, I mean, welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us for those who are joining us for the first time, but also for the faithful participants. Let me first of all introduce the organizers of this event. I am Agnes Hubert. I'm a founding member of Gender 5+, which is the first European feminist think tank. We thought there were a lot of think tanks around the Brussels belt, but none of them were actually concentrating on gender issues. And this is why about 11 years ago, we decided to create this think tank. Our objective is really to analyze European policies with a gender lens, which gives us a sort of transformative outlook on policies, right? It is our third online event on the Conference on the Future of Europe. Why? Because we see the Conference on the Future of Europe and its follow-up as one of the rare opportunities which is present on the European agenda to consolidate not only the EU, but as well to consolidate gender equality within the EU. We've published a report which will be presented today by Victoire, who was not only researched but written this report. And Victoire is now a member of Gender 5+ as well. We are also very honored and pleased to have organized this event with Professor Jacot, who's been awarded a Chair Jean Monnet by the Erasmus program of the European Union. Any students around will know about the Erasmus program, of course. The objective is one of the rare sort of gender-focused Chair Jean Monnet, and the objective of the Chair is to mainstream gender in European Union studies in general. The EuGendering project aims to create, it's called EuGendering, the share, and it aims to create a sort of wide-ranging platform to allow academics, civil society, stakeholders, and policymakers to better understand the challenges which are involved to establish a union of gender equality, of non-discrimination, and of diversity. Within the already very full program of activities of the EuGendering project, which Professor Jacot is sort of leading, the future of Europe was an obvious component. The EU scholarship and gender experts have a lot of bridges to build between their communities and with policymakers to create a gender equal future. And this is what this webinar is trying to do today. I'm very grateful to Sophie Jacot to have involved Gender 5+ in EuGendering and for chairing this meeting today as well.
Thank you very much, Agnes. And yes, it's in fact, so the first event co-organized by Gender 5+ and the Jean Monnet chair, but just the first one. It will not be the last, and we are going to organize many other public debates on gender and the EU. So thank you very much, everyone, for being here. It's really important for us. So I'm just the chair this evening, so I will be in charge of monitoring time, and I'm already sorry and apologize to the participants, but because sometimes when you're online it's a little bit rude to interrupt, so but I will maybe have to do that, because what we are going to do so is in order to discuss on the Conference on the Future of Europe itself, its results, its follow-up from a gender perspective. We really want to keep also some time for a Q&A session at the end. But so we will start in a few minutes with a presentation by Victoire Olczak, who is a member of Gender 5+, also student at Sciences Po, specialist of EU studies and gender studies, and she wrote the report, and she's going to present it. After that, we will have first 2 rounds of interventions by the participants of the events. We are very grateful for them for being here. And what we would like to do is to have a first round of debate and exchanges on the idea of the inclusivity of the process of the conference and what we have learned about how the conference happened from a gender perspective and what should be learned from that, and then a second round of exchanges on the follow-up process and how to tackle inequalities during the follow-up process. Just a few words I would like to, of course, before giving the floor to Victoire and then to the participants to introduce them, of course. So I will go alphabetically because I know that everyone is in a different order behind every screen. So we have tonight, Jéromine Andolfatto with at the very center of my screen. I don't know if it's the case for you, but she's at the very center. So she is a member of the European Women's Lobby, in charge, if I'm not mistaken, of the portfolio of women in decision making, but she especially followed the process of the conference on the future of Europe for the European women's lobbies and lobby and all the activity which have been developed by the EWL on this issue. So we yeah, great. I was just about to say your name. Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield is, thank you very much for being here. So is with us this evening to participate. So Gwendoline is a member of the European Parliament, the group of the Greens and the European Free Alliance. It's very interesting and important for us to have you here, since Gwendoline was part of the Parliament delegation to the conference and also served as a vice chair of the FEM committee, the Committee of the European Parliament on Women's Rights and Gender Equality. As I said, then Victoire Olczak will be presenting a report just afterwards. We also have Alvaro Oleart, who has moved to the center of my screen just now. So, and Alvaro is a postdoctoral researcher at the Université Libre de Bruxelles. And also we are very happy to have him because the very subject of his FNRS research project is the conference itself. He is a specialist of civil society, of the public sphere and of citizens' participation at the EU level, and he served as a civil society observer during the conference. And Also, very happy, thanks again, Gaëtane Ricard-Nihoul, to be there with us. Gaëtane is a member of the Commission of DG Communication and in charge, especially responsible for citizens dialogue, and also member of the Common Secretariat for the conference until last June, and if I don't mistake, you were in charge of organizing the citizens panel. So it's really really important for us. So I'm starting. I'm starting to give the floor. I'm finishing from my part, now Victoire is going to present you for 15 minutes, something like that, the results of the Gender 5+ report on the conference from a gender perspective.
Yes, thank you, Sophie. I'm just gonna try to put my slides on. So if you could just tell me if you see it, there it should be working. Are you seeing it?
Well, it's blank for the moment on my side, but maybe. Okay.
No, it's not working.
Okay, maybe you can, yeah, just
wait.
I can do it for you if you want to start.
I tried another time. It's still not working.
Yeah, I'm going to do it for you.
Okay,
just
you can do it.
Don't worry. Start, and I'm going to do it.
Okay, let's do that. Sorry for that. So first, I would like just to thank all the panelists for accepting our invitation and for all of you for being here tonight. And again, thanks to Agnes and Sophie for making this webinar possible. This paper that I'm going to introduce to you tonight draws mainly from 23 interviews that I've held with various European actors involved in the conference. So it goes from the Conference Secretariat and European Parliament and Commission to civil society organizations and citizens, as well as official documents and academic literature. While adopting both a descriptive and analytical approach to the conference outcomes and processes, the papers aims at designing a recommendation for a better understood gender mainstreaming of the policies that would hopefully come out of this whole process of the conference. And the final objective of this report being to give some guidance on how to build a feminist future for the European Union. When you first look at the conference, at least for me, what was quite striking is this discrepancy between a seemingly open and inclusive process and the lack of actual gender mainstream measures obtained in the end. So I think that first we can discuss of this unprecedented level of women's participation, because in terms of equal participation and representation, we could say that the conference has symbolically respected the gender contract. And to assess the presence of women, I've looked at 3 main elements: the citizens panels, the conference governance structures, and the digital platform. Looking first at the citizens panels and plenaries, the 5 criteria that you can see on the slide allowed quite a good gender parity as well as a quite diverse representation. And from the various interviews I did, I have observed quite a consensus among representatives of the EU institution, of the civil society organization, and the citizens themselves who took part in the panel, saying that parity has been respected. The reality is yet a bit more nuanced if we take a look at the conference executive structures, because if the Common Secretariat for its part rigorously respected gender parity, if you look more closely at every executive board meeting, gender parity was not always effective. And lastly, I think it's really important to look at the digital platform, because it is, for me, a clear illustration of what still needs to be done in the EU for gender equality. Because as soon as the first report on contribution by member state was published, a huge disparity between the participation of women and men was pointed out. And if the COFI leading structure recognized this disparity and tried to tackle it, as overall only 15.9% of the participants identified themselves as women, this effort did not produce any conclusive effect. So gender parity was not effectively respected everywhere, but we still can't deny that the conference succeeded in allowing quite an unprecedented presence of women. And if I say unprecedented, it's because if we compare, for example, to the participation of women during the Convention on the Future of Europe in 2002, well, we see quite a significant improvement as there were only 18 out of 105 members of the Convention that were women at that time. And yet, as much as it is a requirement, having women around the table is not enough to ensure the consideration of gender issues. And this leads us to my second observation, is that out of a total of 326 measures, only 13 measures address gender issue or contain a gender-sensitive approach. And those 13 measures reflect that the GOFI did include some measures likely to improve gender equality. Yet, with only 4% of the measures, there has been no specific effort to mainstream gender issues in the conference. And although these results are quite disappointing, that you can see here, the measures, the 13 measures, we at Gender 5+ are quite convinced that policies can still be drawn both from the content of the recommendation, but more importantly, from the citizen engagement processes set up for the conference. And if we took a quick look first at the gender-related recommendation, well, the conference has proposed only a few, but nevertheless quite interesting proposals. In particular, there is proposal 12 that is pushing for a competitiveness check of every EU policies, and that would carry its review in accordance with the Sustainable Development Goals, and in particular the gender equality component, as well as the proposal 32, whose aim is to tackle the digital gender gap by ensuring a broader access to digital education. But the ones that could have the greatest impact on gender equality in the EU are actually the initially non-gender related ones. And there are mostly two of them. First, the extension of the qualified majority voting. One of the key recommendations is the proposal 39 that advocates for a broader use of the qualified majority voting. And since in all its activities, the Union shall aim to eliminate inequalities and to promote equality between men and women, an increased application of QMV in all areas should have a positive impact on the state of gender mainstreaming of all EU policies. The second one is to grant the European Parliament a right of legislative initiative. And indeed, it seems that the European Parliament has had so far a more positive stance than other institutions towards gender equality. And as a result, we could believe that the European Parliament could propose some legislative initiative that would update the gender contract. Though this must be discussed, as this can happen with the relative balance of political forces that we have in the European Parliament as of today. However, if the European election ever give rise to a more nationalist wave, a real backlash could be institutionalized. So those two very central, very important recommendation raise the broader question of pursuing a convention for treaty changes, because indeed, to be completely effective, this recommendation requires treaty change. And on the one hand, if the treaties were to be discussed again, it would be a great occasion to reinforce the EU binding obligation towards gender equality. It would be an opportunity to expand EU competences in areas such as education. And we do know that education is a key area the EU must work upon to embrace a culture of gender sensitivity across its member states. But on the other hand, if achieving a convention for treaty change could bring all that, there is nothing assuring us that it would go in favor of gender equality. And as we have seen several backlashes of women's rights in the EU member state lately, we must remain very cautious about such a process and allow women's organizations to follow it closely. But as I said in the beginning, there are not only the recommendations that we can use. The democratic processes set up must also be reused but enhanced. And Sophie, I think you've been a bit too far.
Sorry.
Yeah, great, thank you. There are mainly three ways inspired by those processes that we can use to strengthen women's civic participation. First, there is the one of maintaining a platform. The Commission affirmed their will to do so by making the How You Say portal become a one-stop shop for online citizen engagement. But as I have mentioned earlier, women are highly underrepresented on the digital platform, and the Commission will really redouble efforts to reach out to them. And to do so, gender statistics obtained from the platform need to be cross-cutted with age, level of education, geographic origin, socioeconomic background statistics. And once we can identify the least represented categories of women, specific campaigns can be carried out to ensure the participation of those underrepresented women. The Commission has also announced that they will enable citizens panel to deliberate and make recommendations ahead of such a key proposal on the same model as we used during the conference. But again, this mechanism must be able to reach out to a diverse public, and the Commission must redouble its effort to reach out to all women, and in particular the most vulnerable and the less usually represented. And lastly, increasing the role of civil society organizations and social partners was also quite debated during the conference, and it is indeed a key to strengthen women's organization voices. But in order to fulfill that objective, the women's organization must be given adequate resources. Now, even with the best intention to take as much as we want and we can from the conference to advance gender equality, it is still not enough to attain a feminist future. When confronting the conference organizer about this lack of gender mainstreaming, the main answer one can get is that the conference subject was not gender equality. And yet this assumption that the theme discussed in the conference have no gender differential impact is the exact issue. The conference subject may not have been gender equality, but gender equality must be considered in every aspect when discussing Europe's future. And to build this feminist future for Europe, we have a few recommendations that I decided to frame following the conference design in order to better demonstrate what lacked in the conference. So if we take first a look at panel 1, well, we need to move forward with the Patient Transparency Directive. But in addition to equal pay, labor market employment policies bridging the gender gap are also required. And particular attention must be given to disabled women and women of color who are suffering more important employment discrimination. Second, while we welcome the European Care Strategy as a first step towards a care deal for Europe and how women will really put out the heart of it, it's important that we see more effective measures, especially precise target for long-term care. And thirdly, linked to that is the need to shift the way we consider and calculate the gross domestic product. Environmental, social, and gender indicators must be included when we calculate it. If we take a look at the panel 2, the question is, how do we embrace gender equality as a core European value and a basis for our democracy? Well, first, it means achieving gender parity in the European Parliament. The upcoming European election must ensure this gender parity, and in particular, the European electoral list must strive to represent the diversity of European women. But overall, G5+ believes that it's all the European institutions that must play a leadership role, meaning that parity democracy must be mandatory in all public election, nomination, and appointments. And it also means to make gender assessment more systematic, and this in every institution. For instance, an EU Council formation specifically dedicated to gender equality should be established. As well, we should institutionalize a commissioner for gender equality and set up a regular meeting of the College of Commissioners dedicated to gender equality. And in addition to gender impact assessment, gender budgeting must also be made mandatory and public. We know also that gender-based violence and domestic violence are estimated to affect 1 in 3 women in the EU. And yet, gender-based violence wasn't mentioned at any point during the conference. And if the proposal of the Commission on violence against women and domestic violence is a good start, it must be strengthened. The specific needs of refugee women and disabled women victims of violence aren't considered, and they need to be addressed. Relatively to the third panel, we believe that a greener and healthier future comes with gender perspective. We do know that climate change has a particularly damaging effect on the poorest parts of the population. And we also know that women constitute a large proportion of it. And yet, the current climate policy introduced by the EU is completely lacking any feminist approach. The upcoming development forming part of the Green Deal must adopt this gender approach, but also this intersectional approach. And secondly, in the light of the recent restriction on reproductive and sexual rights, we call for a greater protection of this right for European citizens. And in particular, we strongly support the call of the Parliament to include the right to abortion in the EU Charter of Fundamental Rights. Lastly, if we take a look at the a panel on EU in the world, well, the EU needs to enforce a feminist approach as well in its foreign policy. And while we can welcome the GAP3, as women still only account for 31% in the European External Action Service, we call for a more concrete application of the GAP3 measures, because we can only achieve a feminist foreign policy by integrating women in the policy making. And those last two are quite central and related because they both relate to the theory of normative power Europe that was advanced by Ian Manners. And enhancing the EU standards in gender equality is one of the key levers to enforce its normative power. It's only while adopting this position, allowing a gender mainstream climate transition and a disposition for a feminist foreign policy, that the EU can generate higher international standards and thus can manage to both increase its normative power and enhance gender equality standards in Europe and beyond. So if there was only one single conclusion to draw from this report, one should really concentrate on how gender mainstreaming has not worked. And this despite major progress in the proportion of women represented at the various levels of the conference. To attain a feminist Europe, gender equality has to be more structurally embedded into the implementation machinery of the EU. And this requires much more political attention and human and financial resources than what has been given so far. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Victoire. So, well, as I suggest that we then start from there and from this important finding from Victoire's report and the failure of gender mainstreaming during the process of the conference, and so open up the debate on the inclusivity of the process. We suggested a few questions to the panelists, both on the general context of anti-gender backlash and its influence or possible influence during the conference, also on what can be said about the expectations if we don't saw that very much, but are there any other things that we can take from what happened during the citizens panel, and also going forward a question about the measures and the step forward to enhance the inclusivity of EU policymaking in the future. What we can do is to continue with the alphabetical order between the panelists, at least for the first round. I think it would be the easiest way to go with. So yes, maybe Jéromine, if you want to start, and just I've seen just one word. I'm almost sure that Victoire's report for people interested, Victoire's reports is available on the Gender 5+ website, and we can also add the presentation she just made there, and we can also add it on the EuGendering website for people interested. So sorry for that, Jéromine. Maybe if you want to start on this idea of the inclusivity and how to yes, go forward and try to do a better job with gender mainstreaming in the future.
Thank you, Sophie, and thank you, Victoire. Thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be able to share the insights of the European Women's Lobby and discuss with the other panelists and the audience. So when it comes to the backlash on women's rights and the anti-gender environment, for us, the answer as whether or not it was felt during the conference process is yes. It was felt through two main dimensions, in our opinion, as Victoire highlighted when it came to representation of women and women's rights organization in the composition of the conference, and also on the outcome of the conference. So for us, the representation of women was not important enough because there are different elements that played into that, in our opinion. The fact that first, at national level, women's rights organizations have had also to fight many backlash on rights that were secured in the past. For instance, like sexual reproductive health and rights have been increasingly attacked. So women's rights organizations sometimes have a choice to make whether engaging on this, national fights or engaging in the EU process of the conference. So there might be also a level of prioritization. There is also the fact that women activists and women's rights organizations are the target of violence, in particular online violence, when they engage in the political arena. So there might be a choice also to protect themselves. And also when it comes to resource, in the time of crisis, being the pandemic, being the impact of the war in Ukraine, etc., women's rights organizations have had decreasing resource and more missions to fulfill. So it's also about a choice where to use the resources and how to prioritize the use of resources. So that could explain also the lack of representation of women, considering also there is a disconnect between the EU and its citizens and some kind of democratic gap and a general environment of distrust when it comes to politicians and the democratic process these days. And I also wanted to react on the outcome and the lack of gender mainstreaming that Victoire highlighted in the report too. For us, one thing that was quite shocking in a sense was the fact that gender equality in the European panels was treated as a subgroup of one of the panel. And this was really a silo approach when really should have been like inserted in all the work and really mainstream to work properly. And also there were no mention of violence against women and girls. And I think at the first discussion of one of the panel, there was a mention of femicide, but it was removed afterwards. When we know that in many countries femicide have risen. And I think the recommendation often focus a lot on the labor market and sanitary products, but for us, it's lacking a lot of really critical issues these days. And for instance, the denial of abortion rights that many women have suffered in member states, and some have died because of this denial. And then I just wanted to touch upon on the second part of the question when it comes to what measures could improve participation and representation of women in this kind of democratic process, should we continue in the same vein as the conference. Well, as I mentioned previously, resources. It's important to support women's rights organizations because they've been conveying the interests and the concerns of women in different European countries at the European level to the institution. And they are also a really important gatekeeper when it comes to informing citizens about what the EU is doing for women's rights, informing citizens and women in particular of how they can be involved in the democratic process and participate in politics. So it's important that they have these resources. And something else is having strong and ambitious measure when it comes to parity democracy. So parity democracy, meaning an equal representation of women and men in decision-making position, but also having a social organization where women and men share an equal responsibility, equal duties, and equal rights. That's really important. And Victoire touched upon the reform of the EU electoral law. The Parliament report had really encouraging measures on gender equality, specifically the provision of a quota and zip list system on transnational lists. However, the report is now discussed in the Council, and it looks like transnational lists might not make the cut, which would imply that the provision on gender equality and quota and zip list might fall. So this is an opportunity for us that would be missed. And it's really important in the context of the upcoming election and the lack of, democracy, the trust in democracy of citizens maybe is lacking, and transparency of the EU with the latest scandal. It's important to use this opportunity really to get closer to the citizens. And one last point, because I think I'm over my time a bit, but care. Care is really crucial. If we want women to be able to get involved in the political debate, they need to have the time to do it. So that's why it's really important that the European care strategy provide affordable, accessible, and high quality care. In the first lockdown, women spent in average 18 hours on housework and cooking, when for many it was 12 hours. And accumulating on all the care responsibility, this makes a huge difference in their opportunities to engage. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Yes, and so you mentioned the especially the project which is going on and linking to the next election. So I think it's a perfect transition to give the floor to Gwendoline Delbos-Corfield and on this idea of inclusivity within the conference and how to gain lessons from that for the future and for other decision-making processes at the EU level.
Yes, thank you. A lot has already been said, so I will try to complement with things that have not been said yet. Sorry. On the inclusivity, because of the Parliament, we did manage to have a more inclusive process than what had been first foreseen. Just to include the citizens. It was a first battle. The idea at the very beginning was really to have representatives of various levels of governance, European, national, local even, to have, of course, the three institutions of the Parliament, and to have organized representation like trade unions and the big organizations in Brussels. But the idea of the panel citizens was a difficult one. Members of Parliament are still very much attached to the idea that democracy is representative democracy and not participative democracy. So that was a first fight, and we managed this one. And it is true, the Greens the most with Renew. We really were the one to ask for citizens panel, taking the example of what had happened in France with the environmental debates, but also, of course, in Ireland around abortion and what a land like Baden-Württemberg often experience. But in this fight about citizenship, citizen participation, the focus on gender was lost a bit. I must say it very clearly. It was lost on various levels. Someone like me who would have made it a specific fight, we were very much fighting already on having a citizens panel, and so this got a bit lost in the way. And I think we were few members of Parliament. I'm thinking of a discussion I had with my colleague from SD. I think you know her very well, but Gabi Bischoff, German SD. I remember at the very when it was about to start, both of us just thought, oh, we never fight it that much on this, and so we don't have a specific panel on it, or we don't have a gender mainstreaming approach to it enough, and all of this. So this was a disappointment for sure. And just to come back on the gender governance, to complement something that was very well said by Victoire, is that, for example, if you take the Parliament, the groups had all organized a leader on the topic. All groups sent men. It was very clear. It was the usual suspects like Guy Verhofstadt. It was Daniel Freund for my group. It was really all very much men, and we were very annoyed about that. At least the commissioner in charge was Vera Jourova, so that was bringing a bit. But on the governance side, we really had a problem of mostly men in charge. The fact that it was only considered as a subtopic from time to time in a panel, and of course in a more general context of some governments being really anti-women rights. And being present at this title, but also a general environment in Europe that is not yet good. I mean, you have to remember that in some countries you can still do a list for European elections that are only male. You have no necessity of putting even one woman on your list. It's the case in a number of member states. It means that some delegation, I'm thinking of the EPP Romanian delegation, I think there are 19, it's only men. It doesn't mean that you don't have interesting people on it, but it's only men. So this is also the overall context. So then, of course, the assessments would be a mixed assessment, I think, of the situation. there were members coming from the citizen sides that were really outspoken on these topics and really brave. I remember a young Polish woman that was very much engaged through all the process, and she brought back all of these topics, the backlash and all of this, and that was really important. And in general, I think that what came from the citizens was much more progressive than what we had expected, and most of all the member states had expected, that they were on a very conservative side, and the citizens on a lot of topics, being migration, being women's rights and all this, came with much more progressive ideas. So that was one of the nice assessment. But of course, indeed, some topics, I mean, I won't repeat it, a number of topics were completely absent. That was really a problem. So the assessment is mixed. Now, the biggest problem we will have now is the institutionalization. I think Victoire showed this very much, because the institutionalization of this procedure will become again very male dominated. This has to be very clear for everyone. This is one of our biggest problems. I'm giving the name again of Gabby Bischoff. We are two women in a male-dominated committee. AFCO, Constitutional Affairs, is really male-dominated. It's male-dominated in its members. It is male-dominated in its ideology. It is not only male-dominated, but it's really geek of procedures that are old members of parliament with a big German culture of the freedom of mandate. You should never oblige anything. So parity is an awful obligation. Transparency is an awful obligation. Everything is always an awful obligation, because an MEP should be always free of his mandate, member of parliament. So this is the institutional part is going to be complicated, and the same with the council, where of course we have a very, today, a lot of governments. First, men are the leaders, and also the gender debate is not present in the council. So these are important aspects that we should not forget in the institutionalization. Now, we are fighting very much in the parliament. We are now at the stage where we are, you may know this, working on what would be the proposal of the parliament for new modification of the treaties, and we are drafting this at the moment in the parliament so that we can present this in a follow-up of what was done in the conference of the future of Europe. In this work, the parliament has decided to make gender one of the aspects. So each group, excluding the extreme right, but the 6 group, have a rapporteur on the topic. Each of them is in charge of one part of the topics, and Gabby Bischoff, for example, is in charge of employment questions, gender questions, and some discrimination questions. And she has it in a portfolio. So it means that it is one of the topics that is taken into consideration. This is very important. We did an opinion in FEM also that was very important. But it doesn't change. So the procedure, the really procedure part, very constitutional part, we need to be very strong on this. But most of all, I think that today what we need in Parliament, in Council, in European Union in general, is really to push very much for this gender mainstreaming approach. This is today our main fight. Awareness is the first point. Data is our first tool. I very often say that it is, you would be amazed in the differences in Parliament between the Agriculture Committee or the AFCO Committee and a number of other committees. In these 2 committees, Agriculture and AFCO, you will never get women experts in hearings. It seems that they don't exist. You will not have any woman in charge of big files, structural files with big funds behind it, etc., etc. So the awareness on these, and it's important to recall that you have 40% of farmers in European Union that are women. So this idea that farmers are only men, it's not true, but this is the image that we all have, this fantasy. So gender mainstreaming is a big problem. Gender representation is a big problem, of course, until in the parliament, people in charge of the files and specifically the files about the future of Europe, the files about federalism, the files about procedures are men, which is really the case and the story since years and years. And it's also in our legacy, historical legacy. You know, it's Spinelli. It's always men that were the great founders of Europe and of the rules of Europe and how Europe functions. So there's all of this to work on. There's also the gender representation in parliament, gender representation in government, because of course until we're not in these places, we don't take this.
Yeah, so just a few
just
words.
To say, so that we need also to work on representation, and then later in the discussion I can come back on a few topics where it's mostly important.
Sure. Thank you very much. Yeah, well, no comment. Just Alvaro, just take the floor, and I think you had the opportunity to see a lot of things during your field work that would be of interest for the discussion.
Yeah, well, first of all, many thanks, Sophie, Victoire, and Agnes for the invitation and for putting this event together. It's really a pleasure to be here. So yeah, I followed very closely the European citizen panels and the conference as a whole. And maybe to complement a little bit what my colleagues have said before, Jéromine and Gwendoline, I'm going to talk just briefly about the design of the conference, because I think that an issue that might explain to a certain extent the lack of gender mainstreaming in the process is that activist or feminist organizations and feminist civil society was not structurally included in the design of the conference. So, for example, I think that the European Women's Lobby, alongside many other civil society organizations, was part of the Civil Society Convention that itself was created in some ways because the initial architecture that the three institutions designed initially did not really include civil society. And as a reaction, then they created the Civil Society Convention that included many civil society organizations, among which the European Women's Lobby. So I think that the role of women's rights organizations and of civil society more broadly, in some ways, could have been integrated better from the beginning. So, for instance, one of the key elements of the conference was the decentralized events, right? However, these decentralized events was not entirely clear how the substance that would be discussed in these decentralized events would be included in the input of the conference, in the plenary sessions, and so on. So I think that partially explains, and I think, for example, in the European citizen panels, the conference secretariat did an effort to make sure that there was gender parity, that there was an equal number of men and women, and so on. So I think that was good, but at the same time, there was, I think, a little bit of a depoliticized approach. By that meaning that in the European citizen panels, most of the discussions were fed by academics, which is great. I mean, I am an academic myself. I am not going to criticize the role of academics, but I think it might have been helpful as well to integrate more clearly the political conflicts that exist, and that might have been helped by integrating some political conflict between different political parties. I'm sure that the Greens' proposals on gender equality are different from those than from EPP, and I think that those more conflictual debates might have made easier to raise the salience of gender equality as an issue throughout the conference, and in particular throughout the citizen panels. And then another thing that is also related to it was that the conference, to a certain extent, did not really feed broader public debate on the future of Europe. So in some ways, the conference was not really picked up, not only by the media, but more broadly by national parliaments. I mean, there were some national parliamentarians that were participating as plenary members and so on, but there was not really a salient debate on the future of Europe. And I think that it would have been helpful to make sure that the European citizen panels would feed the broader public debate in a way that that the conference would go out of the usual suspects, because initially the idea of the conference is precisely through random selection in the citizen panels to go beyond the usual suspects. But in the end, it very much seems that the process and the design of the conference led to very similar type of debates as we have, let's say, in the Brussels bubble and so on, and in some ways reproduced a lot of the already ongoing dynamics at the EU level that yeah, in some ways were not really able to to change that. So yeah, maybe I will just leave it here, and I'm happy to come back to it. But yeah, I think that the connection between the more micro process of the European citizen panels and the plenary sessions and the broader public sphere was a little bit missing, and I think that could have been reinforced by making sure that feminist organizations would have been involved more directly in that process to sort of mediate between the different aspects and include more clearly gender mainstreaming approach. So yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, and this challenge of feeding the public debate is really an essential one, and I think that Gaëtane will agree to that, of course. And yes, I'm just handing you the floor. Maybe we really were at this question when working with Victoire on this number and the statistics of the very low number of women participation on the digital platform. This is something that maybe we would like to address with you for the follow-up and the future of citizens debate and participation at EU level. But you can take this one or any other question, of course, Gaëtane.
Yes. So good evening, everyone. And first of all, thank you very much for this event that allows us to keep the interest and on the conference and its follow-up, because I think it's very important. There needs to be actors that continue to talk about it. Otherwise, you know how it works at the EU level. People go to something else, and there is a risk that these very important follow-up aspects are a bit put aside because of other priorities. So thank you very much for that. I want to say, first of all, that, as you know, the June Declaration, which was really the founding document for the conference, referred a lot to two important elements. First, the importance of the diversity of the sociological and geographical profiles of people participating in the conference, and inclusiveness. So it means that this was our feuille de route, roadmap, you know, for the conference, and we tried really to implement that in the different aspects. And I wanted to say that I wanted to follow on what Alvaro was saying, that perhaps an element was a bit missing in your presentation, which, by the way, was very interesting. So thank you very much for having done that work. I think it's very useful. But the decentralized event part, I know it's very difficult to go and assess these because they were done in a very different way in all the member states, but they were quite a big part of the conference too. And they were reported on the platform. So when you assess the platform, yes, it's what you are assessing actually are just the participants on the platform, the direct participants on the platform, but not all the indirect ones, which were all these events. And some of them, as you know, actually use some methods that we use at EU level, like panels. They were national panels and they were regional panels. So these ones, we know that they respected the very clear parity of participation, for example. And on the platform for this event, there is a tool that I think stayed very much on the radar, but I think was quite interesting. At the beginning, we actually drafted guidelines on how to ensure an event is inclusive, for example. So at the beginning, we really had this idea in mind that the participatory events that would be organized at decentralized level and reporting on the platform was a key element of the conference. And we really tried to give guidelines on how to make an event inclusive. There are guidelines on participatory formats that people could use. So this was the intention. To what extent it was used or not, we don't have the data, the precise data on that, but it would be very interesting to look at it and see on that front what's the result. On the platform, when it comes to analyzing those who actually registered and responded to the questionnaire, because as you rightly point out, the rate of response from women was much lower than men, but there's also a big part who did not answer. And this is an element that we unfortunately will probably keep with us, because we were forbidden to make this question compulsory for a data protection reason. And so it means that most probably, if we have one, it will probably remain voluntary, and then we have this problem of not being really able to assess exactly the profile of the participants on the platform. And most probably for the next generation platform, you know, the one you've been talking about, which will be this one-stop shop that we are now building up. The questionnaire might not even be a first thing to do, because we will probably give the priority for people to participate, and we want to also diminish as much as possible the obstacles for this participation. And responding to a questionnaire, even though it's not compulsory, can be an obstacle. So there's this trade-off with the platform, you know, that we want to have the data to be able to adjust the policy towards to increase the participation and make it more equal, women and men, for example, but there are other factors, of course. But we also don't want this to become too difficult to access. So there is this trade-off. We will need to re-examine and see how we can improve the women's participation without making it too complicated for citizens to participate. But for example, during the conference, when we saw that this was very low, we really tried to go into proactive strategy towards women. We mobilized the representation. We really tried them to balance that a bit better. And finally, in the process, the third aspect that we are very happy about, of course, are the European Citizen Panel, because there we could completely control the parity, and we actually got a very good result compared to the target and what we got. So, and I can tell you, for having participated in the panels and saw also the ambassadors from these panels in the plenary, that there was absolutely no domination of men in that. Quite the contrary, sometimes in some groups, women were very present in all the positions of influence, as ambassadors, but also as rapporteur, as spokesperson in the working group in the plenary. I don't have the numbers. I didn't do the check of that. It's my feeling, what I've seen, and I think it's the case. So when it comes to ensuring parity, random selection is a powerful tool. It's a powerful tool for many other aspects, for also different socioeconomic background, etc. But for parity, that definitely is a powerful tool. And you will have noticed that even though the platform and some of the decentralized events might not have been as good in terms of parity, we gave a lot of I would say space to the results of the panels in the process, because if you look at the way the proposals were made, the recommendations coming from the panels, whether European and nationals, were very much favored in the process. So in a way, we gave to the process that was the most diverse and the most inclusive a lot of weight in the process. So that's interesting as well to look at that. And I would actually recommend to use the word proposals when you talk about what comes out of the plenary and recommendations for what comes out of the panels, because that's the wording that we use. And I think in your presentation, you talk about the recommendation when you talk about what comes out of the plenary, because I would also if you have time, if there is a moment to do that, perhaps it would be interesting to look also at the recommendations of the panels to see how the gender was treated compared to the proposals that came out of the plenary. Because I remember, I don't know all of them by heart, but I remember that the gender issue was quite present in the panels, in everywhere, and came quite high in the recommendation. In the proposals themselves, you did a very good job, I've seen, identifying everywhere when the gender issue was mentioned. I remember there's quite a lot on care as well, as the colleague mentioned that it was an important issue. I suppose you have identified that as well, but I think it's also an element that seemed to be quite present in the proposal. I want perhaps to react also on what Alvaro was saying about the organized civil society. It is true that there is room of improvement in the way it was the participation was imagined and structured, but at the same time we were innovating. We were putting the priority on the democratic innovation about the direct involvement of citizens. So this was really the center of our efforts. And as a colleague from the parliament was saying, we really put a lot of effort into it, and it was not easy, as she also reminded, that there are some people who were not at ease with this in some political representative are not at ease. So there was a big fight there to let the citizens to really put the citizens at the center. And so we could not put the efforts on everything, basically. I want to be very clear there. And I think we made a big qualitative step in terms of citizens' participation with this conference. And perhaps indeed another now a page to be written would be, how do we make sure that these new democratic processes, this innovation, can work in synergy as much as possible with organized civil society. Organized civil society was in the plenary, but is there a way to make them accompany a bit more the panels with a lot of synergy? Maybe this is an area where we need to discuss. And I want also to say, because Alvaro was mentioning the possibility for the deliberation to address also more the conflicts and the different positions, that will help maybe to bring out some of these issues. It was difficult with the subject of the conference being so vast to organize a true deliberation on each of the aspects with the different point of view. So we chose the academic angle, asking them rather to give the state of the debate, if you want, rather than having a direct debate. It was just a matter of the topic. Now that we are doing the European Citizens Panel, the new generation that we are doing now only the Commission side, we are focusing on much more, specific issues: food waste, virtual worlds, and learning mobility. There we can really look at more the trade-offs and the different views. So perhaps this is also, if we end up doing one which is rather on this kind of gender issues or topic related to that, then I think we could indeed show more the different angles. Maybe I stop here for now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gaëtane. And yeah, I think there is an important link, and I relate to I think the very relevant comment that Pauline Cullen just wrote on the discussion, and it has also been said before that sometimes citizens are way ahead of politicians and policymakers on having a progressing view on the public debate, and this is really a good transition to the second round of questions, asking the participants about the follow-up process and the way forwards, and what to really put the emphasis on among the different proposals, recommendations, and ideas to tackle inequalities. Maybe I suggest that we can do the reverse way. Start with Gaëtane, and if you just try to be limited in your answers, I'm really sorry, but if we want to take a few questions afterwards. Gaëtane, sorry, so it's
Sorry, so you asked me more on the follow-up now of the conference.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Really on the follow-up and the important measures that you think are important if we want to tackle gender inequalities in the future. What should we put the emphasis on? Victoire mentioned the right of initiative for the European Parliament. There is the treaty changes, the qualified majority voting, and what should be really supported more if we want to address this issue.
Well, I'm afraid I'm not qualified to tell you what is more or less important in the proposal that came out of the plenary, because that's not my role, and I'm not going to say, or take a stance between what the Council is saying, the Parliament is saying. I mean, the position of President von der Leyen said she would support a convention, and now the ball is in the court of the Parliament and the Council to agree on this. And of course, for QMV, apart from the passerelle clause, you need probably a treaty change. So on that front, I think the Commission position is quite clear. On the different proposals and those related, those that have a link to gender or care, as I was saying earlier, I mean, I'm not also an expert on this, so I'm not going to talk for my colleagues who work in DG employment or just on these issues, but I can tell you that what I've seen from the Commission angle, because now that each institution is responsible for the follow-up, each with its own sphere of competence. So for the Commission, it meant looking at the different proposals and be ready to table follow-up proposals in the work program, and this is what we've done. And I think it was done seriously in the way that all services were asked to look at the proposals of the conference to prepare the work program. And when you see the work program, you will see that about 80%, and it's put in blue, are linked to the conference proposal. So there was a request from the president to look at the proposals the different DGs were putting and telling them, cross-check with the conference proposals and the work program. I need to know whether it's linked or not to this. So I think this was really a major step for a participatory process, that all services were required to do their job and will be again required to do their job regularly. And so when I before coming here, of course, I also asked my colleagues working in that field, where they are, and they very quickly could come up with, which I will not detail here because we as I said, I'm not the expert, so I'm not going to, but they very quickly came up with, okay, this is what we are doing, and they knew exactly which proposal referred to their field, and they could react very quickly on what they were doing. So I think just that, in terms of process, in terms of follow-up, shows the seriousness of the institution. And if you look now at the European citizens panels, the new generation that we do only on the Commission side, we do them before we table a proposal. So the idea is really to take into account the recommendations from the citizens to draft the proposal. So from the Commission side, this is really gives credit to the process, because this is where the Commission has the power, with the monopoly of the proposal. The legislative initiative, and they want the panel to be there to co-construct, if you want, that moment of policy making. So we will see also the result now with the three panels. I mean, they are actually targeting different kind of proposal of different nature. So the input will be different, but it'll be interesting to also see, you know, what kind of impact it has on the proposal. And then it's a good track, I would say, also. And for organized civil society, if they have an important issue, they can also, you know, see in the Commission whether a panel would be a good idea, for example, to put the spotlight on the issue. As Alvaro was saying, there is indeed the biggest issue is whether this will help to stir public debate. And this is where, of course, we need to make a big qualitative leap compared to the conference, where we need that to be much more visible, these kind of processes. So now we are trying with this more policy-specific topic to increase the communication potential, also towards civil society, the actors who are involved in the field. But every time we will need to improve, and I hope that also the platform, once it will be there, will be a bit a place where we can connect these policy processes with the wider public, perhaps also with some deliberative element online, where we will try to bring in the wider public into the topic.
Thank you very much. Alvaro, you
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I think it's a really difficult question because, I mean, as Gaëtane was saying, the conference included almost every policy area, so that had a lot of challenges, among which that you have to deliberate on all those issues. But maybe if I can highlight one dimension that I think worked pretty well is maybe healthcare. And I think the recommendations, the proposals, well, both the recommendations, but also the proposals in the plenary were pretty good in terms of reinforcing public healthcare and providing and making sure that there's equal access for all. I think that's a really important vision. However, at the same time, you also deal that healthcare happens to be a national competence. So that also brings its own challenges for how you address that from the European level. But yeah, I think the working group within the plenary in the conference on healthcare worked pretty well, and I think also because of the context of COVID and so on, really helped to raise the issue. But yeah, I would maybe just put that issue on the agenda and pass it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Victoire, do you want to step in?
Yes, I do. I just wanted to quickly react to what Gaëtane said about the wording. I tried to follow what was used in the coffee final report, talking about proposals, but I will change that. So I want to say that I believe the expectations are quite high because the issues at stake are of high importance. And as we have already mentioned earlier, the backlashes on women's rights are multiplying in Europe, and so we are at a quite critical moment. So first, I would strongly insist on the follow-up and how we must ensure the integration of all women. And I would really want to highlight this question of reaching out to the most vulnerable and less usually represented women. And that's why before talking about implementing the recommendation, I would insist on how those very innovative democratic processes must be reused. So we talk about student panels, such as platform, but more than that, I think that regarding the student panels, they must be quite adapted in order to ensure those more vulnerable and less usually represented to be represented and to have their opinion on the future of Europe heard. And that's why I strongly insist on the data collected through the platform. I believe it's quite precious, and cross-cutting the statistic is really necessary to identify and have a better idea of who are those less represented women and how we can reach out to them and carry out specific campaigns directed to them. And regarding to those new students panels, well, they work very well, so it's a great initiative to maintain the process. And what could also be relevant, if that's possible, it would be like to launch panels only gathering women, because we do know that women speak less in group settings where men are present, and that the gender composition of focus group has been proven to compromise women's ability to voice opinion on all issues, and especially when it comes to matters related to gender. So I think a way to address this barrier could be to hold women-only panels in parallel to the rest of the citizens panels. I also believe we should move forward with the implementation of the content of the recommendation. Of course, we need to carry out the recommendation that we're addressing gender issues, but more importantly, we need to make sure that when we are implementing the rest of the recommendation, and as well as for the rest of the EU policies, we go through a whole gender impact assessment and a gender budgeting assessment. And regarding, lastly, the recommendations that are more looking at processes, well, of course, I am in favor of the whole reforming, looking at how to reform the treaties. It would be a way to reinforce the EU binding obligation and to integrate at a greater level the gender mainstreaming in the EU implementation machinery. But again, as we have said, any convention on the subject must be carried out by allowing women's organizations to follow it closely, and we must remain very cautious about such a process with the multiplying backlashes of women's rights. And yeah, my final word would really like to make sure that while we adopt a gender approach, we also adopt an intersectional approach, and therefore we ensure the inclusion of all women, and we make sure that their specific needs are heard and addressed, and therefore really ensure an intersectional approach to action against discrimination.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. It was very dense in a very limited amount of time. Thank you. Thank you very much. I see
the time going on, so thank
perfect.
You, Sophie.
Thank you. Thank you. Gwendoline, did you want to add something, and where to put the emphasis on the concentrate the fight in a way?
Yes, of course, all the elements of constitutional changes will be in favor of gender approach. That's for sure. The less unanimity, more legislative powers for Parliament. That's for sure. But this is more general aspects. But I understand that they are the frame to start, of course, and also the topical issues that were presented at the very beginning, the feminist foreign policy or the care strategy and all this, we all agree on this. But what I think should be really more and more a topic that is put to discussion in dialogues with citizens, but also with national members, with the big lobbies and all of this, is the gender budgeting aspect. I think this is a crucial and essential point. It's better to look at through that lens, that thinking on in this topic we should improve that, or in this, if you have the gender budgeting, then in fact you can improve everything. The examples are known, but I think most of them are known, but I can say it again, you know, the recovery funds that the European Union were constructing exactly at the same moment as we were doing the Conference of the Future of Europe are to the beneficial of mostly men, because the sectors that are going to be helped by these big recovery funds that was thought through by Commission with the help of the member states and the parliaments as sectors where male work mostly. It's digital, it's new technology, it's transportation and of this mobility. And we really fighted to have a gender mainstreaming approach on this, and we didn't manage. But this is a good example of a lot of money, European money, being given to the countries, and once again to help men and not women. And we could repeat this sort of example all the time. We are going to take big decisions about energy and about climate, and we know that if we don't have a gender approach more generally on this, it's going to be at the benefit once again of the men. Women are the ones that live more in energetic precarity. They are the ones with the bad cars, the polluting cars. They are the ones needing them for their jobs because they are nurses or that sort of job where they need to have the cars and all this. So this is really something that we should bring as a lens to work on everything, and maybe less do it in a topical way, but really thinking always in that sort of more general thing. To finish, we would need gender council for sure. When the idea came up, it came up from a colleague from Renew, in fact. I immediately thought that is really a good idea. We need a place, symbolic place, where these decisions are discussed, like you have an agriculture summit, you have a health council, well, you need a gender council, also because it will oblige these countries that really don't have someone that cares about all of this to think, who am I going to send to this council? It also, of course, will be support for them. So it's really, really important. And the last thing I wanted to say is that to complement what was said indeed by Pauline on the fact that society is often more progressive. The problem, it's true, we have today representations that are not really representing the diversity of our societies, and so they are not also focusing on topics that are important for everyone. But to help that, we would need also the citizens panel, not only to have a say and to be consultative, but we would need them sometimes to really be capable of assessing what we're doing, in the gender impact, but the impact in general of what we're doing. For the moment, they have been really given only the place to discuss a bit. We would have liked the citizens panel to really be capable of reacting at the very end, also saying, what did you do with everything that we gave you, and where did it go? Until that is not done, the progressive aspect of the society will have a difficulty to be heard. Finally, I really insist on what was said. We are going to be able to advance on gender, pure equality, woman-man equality things more and more, but for the moment, the representation of the diversity of society in an intersectional way, the representation of the poor, the representation of the handicapped, the representation of the migration, and of course, all of the diversity aspect is very, very absent, not only in political representation, not only in governance, but also in the citizens panel. Still in citizen panel, it was one sort of woman that was present. So it is a big, big problem.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jéromine.
Thank you. I'll try to keep it short so we have a bit of time for questions maybe. So the proposal mentions some specific things on women in decision making, stressing their importance, the implementation and the assessment of the gender equality strategy, as well as the care aspect. So when it comes to women in decision making, the European Women's Lobbyists think it should, obviously, there should be a follow-up on that, and in particular, there should be a commission dealing only with gender equality and women's rights, and this commissioner should be in charge of ensuring the implementation of the gender equality strategy, its assessment. There should be gender equality 2.0, and something that is important to keep in mind is that gender mainstreaming is actually a legal obligation of the EU under the treaty. So yes, a treaty change might institutionalize a bit more women's rights and gender equality, but the obligation is already there. So it would be good also to make sure that representation and gender mainstreaming is happening with the tools we already have, and that obligations are actually followed through. We also think, and it's something we've been pushing since before our campaign in 2019, that there should be an EU Council configuration for gender equality. And in terms of representation and for the parliament, we want to see parity in the candidate list. So like mandatory obligation for a ZIP system or quotas, so that women have access to power, but have also the means to influence the working of the parliament and the legislation, etc. Gender budgeting was already mentioned, and we also support that heavily, because it's not only about mainstreaming gender equality in the policy, it's also about putting the means behind this intention, having the political will, and political will needs to be supported by money to make things happen. We mentioned care. It's also really important to put care at the center of how we rethink our economy and have a feminist perspective on our economy, specifically as we're moving towards a green transition. And I just wanted to add something that for us is really lacking from the proposal of the conference, is the whole aspect around violence against women and girls. For us, it's critical to go further when it comes to the EU directive on domestic violence and violence against women. And it's also critical to implement the Istanbul Convention and to have stronger provision also on the online aspect of violence. And in this way, can encourage women to be more vocal and fear less for the safety when they engage in the policy debates. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I think we can open the floor and gather maybe a few questions. I don't know if we have some questions among the audience. I don't know if someone you can open your mic or raise your yellow hand that I can see you. Anybody? No one's there. It's always the same. It's always a bit difficult at the beginning. I don't know. Agnes, sure.
Sorry, I was not intending to take the floor first. Thank you very much, I mean, for this debate, because it's been extremely rich in proposals, in analysis, etc., etc. I mean, I just want to make a sort of, I mean, looking forward, and particularly Jéromine sort of mentioned it to the European elections. I mean, obviously there is this follow-up of citizens panels, and how can we sort of bring forward issues which should be, I mean, not necessarily consensual, but I mean, very sort of gender-based, like the question of care, the question of violence, etc. How can they be brought forward much more? I'm not sort of excluding other issues, but maybe some are more likely to be prone to an actual debate between political parties, between sort of institutions, etc. So it's a really good question for everybody, for the institutions as much as the academic world, as well as civil society. And we want us as Gender 5+ to know, I mean, how can we push things forward, and both through analysis or through just sort of promoting debate.
Thank you very much. I don't know. I don't see other question for the time being. So maybe. Oops, sorry. Oh yes, maybe Mary Collins, if you want to add, and then I can give the floor back to the panelists.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm not sure whether I'm going to try and put on my camera. Thank you so much for this really very interesting and rich debate. It's been extremely, really interesting. And I think it gives us a lot of food for thought. And what I would like to say is that one thing, you know, we're in a very fast, rapid changing world, a volatile world. And, you know, the last year we've seen the invasion of Russia in Ukraine and the impact that that's had, particularly on women. And what we must be forward looking as well, and think about the post-conflict period. Where are women? Why, you know, we must ensure that women are around the table, that they're being prepared to be part of the, you know, the post-conflict resolution, because it'll come sometime. But also I want to point out that the Citizens Assembly didn't really look at issues that are very raw today, and the increase in poverty, and particularly poverty among women, and particularly homelessness. I think that we don't have the data per se, but there is visibly an increase in homelessness among women. So these are the real issues. And also in terms of the energy, the rise in energy prices, and the impact that that has on women. So these are issues that have kind of fallen off, I would say, or haven't been brought into the core of the debates. And how can we ensure that the reality on the ground in relation to women is actually brought in to the future? And particularly you talk about the next generation. So let's ensure that the next generation includes all women, and particularly these issues that are really impacting on women all over Europe today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I'd like just to give the floor back for maybe just 1 or 2 minutes reactions to what Mary said, especially, for example, on economic inequalities, and Agnes about the priorities for the next elections. A few words so that we do not expend too much on our time. Jéromine, you want to say a few final words?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the priorities. I think I highlighted them on the last intervention, and for the poverty, I think something that we see as a European Women lobby within our membership, when we exchange with members, they really highlight the fact that the pandemic, then the war in Ukraine and the impact it has on inflation, etc., has led to a kind of re-traditionalization of the role of women. So women are framed as not really legitimate in the public debate, not really legitimate on the political space, and as if they should, stay in the domestic world, in their care responsibility, etc. So there is not only it's not only a priority to move forward and improve gender equality, but it's desperately needed also to secure the progress we had made, because we are going backward in certain countries. So I think that's also important to keep that in mind.
Thank you so much. Gwendoline, you want to add a few words?
Yes, just to say, for the European election and in general for the political debate, you really have to realize that there's a huge gap between the level of progressiveness in society and the political way of taking decisions today and the procedures to take decisions. There's still a very huge gap. It's at 2 levels. The fact is that the level of conservatism is still very high in the politicians compared to what the society is expecting and considering as normal. And then there's also a huge gap. Once again, I want to insist on that, between what we have in mind as politicians in a general way and the moment it has to become a rule. There's always a first reaction that is, we don't want rules on anything. Parity is a dangerous rule. And gender budgeting, why are you putting in place complicated things? It's rules that are not useful, useless, and all of this. So we have these plenary resolution of the parliament, 70% for big feminist moment, or for big regulations, not big regulation, but big progress on all feminist topics. And then when you have to transform them in rules, in policy making, in procedures, then immediately these same people and these same groups will have a reaction of, oh, no. It's good to have the nice ideas, but you shouldn't transform them. So the gaps are still very big. And this is something that is difficult then to go back to the electoral people, because indeed, when I meet young women students from France, they just think that all of this is already in place. They have difficulties to understand that we are so lacking behind. So this is one first thing. The second thing, I want to insist on the lack of awareness. Most of my colleagues, if I tell them tomorrow, look at who has the bad cars in the society, and when you do a very harsh climate changes that as an ecologist I really want, so I really want these rules, but they will be mostly impacting the woman. My colleagues, they open big eyes, sort of, why would it be more women that have the bad cars, the old cars? And the same for everything, the energy precarity. You have to give data. There's really always the gender blind first thing that comes to the mind of my male colleagues, but also of some of my female colleagues. The idea is that societies have progressed, and so now equality is there. Is there really problems? So the awareness, the data, the awareness for the next discussions, and it comes back to finish on what Mary was saying. The idea that poverty is more women is still completely an unknown perspective in politicians. The homeless is an old man with a beard and a bottle of wine. These images are still very strong. The pause, so to come back always on the fact that women alone with children are today the most poor in our societies, that they need help, that we need special policies for that, is really very far from most of my colleagues, because they don't have the awareness of the situation. So these are topics where we need to crucially work on.
Thank you so much. Alvaro, you want to add something? Oh, sorry, I skipped Victoire in the alphabetical order.
you can go on with Alvaro, that's fine. Go on, Alvaro.
Maybe just to raise, following a little bit Mary's intervention, I think that one thing that might be interesting to just highlight as well is the role of migrant women, refugees, and so on, because for instance, in the final proposal of the conference, there's a reference to, on the one hand, strengthen the role of Frontex, and on the other hand, to respect human rights. And I think those sort of tensions are not really addressed. And I think that the role as well of gender is really important one to make sure that voices not only of women in general, but also of migrant women are also heard in the public sphere, of NGOs that are working on these issues, of trade unions that are working on these issues, to make sure that they have a voice in the public debate.
Thank you so much. Victoire, sorry.
Yeah, well, to be very quick, I just wanted to react on what Gwendoline has just said about the lack of awareness. I feel that there is a huge lack of education on how to apply a gender approach, what it means, and I really believe that it also comes back to the question of how to make sure that the implementation machinery of the EU has this gender lens. And really, again, I believe that having this EU Council, but also a meeting of commissioners dedicated to gender equality, are important step towards having this more awareness about what is gender mainstreaming, what it means, how do we do it, and yeah, that's basically it. I think we are all over the time, so we'll give the floor to, I think it's Gaëtane.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you. Very quickly on different elements. First, on the awareness and that, I just wanted to say there is also a proposal on this, so I think it's a good pick up, maybe to push. I just also wanted to recall, because it was mentioned that the panelists didn't have any feedback. I think it was pretty big element, the feedback this time, and I want to highlight it as also an improvement in the way we do student participation. We organized a feedback event. Of course, it was not the ideal one we would have liked to organize, but it was still a big step to do that, to mobilize the 3 institutions, to take a full day to give feedback on the results, and this happened in December. I wanted also to react on the suggestion of a woman-only panel. I mean, there is also in the communication of the Commission, you will see it, a proposal also to do a use test, having a panel only composed of young people, for example. I'm very open to the idea of doing this kind of thing for specific reasons, but I also want to really insist on the strengths of the panels. For me, is the diversity, is the fact that you have different generation, different gender, and that is reflecting the EU's diversity. That creates a result that is really of quality, because in reality we put in one room people who don't talk to each other so much anymore, you know, across gender, across nationalities, across also background coming from urban, rural, and this diversity in total that I think makes the result very interesting. It doesn't mean, however, and this then I come to the question of Mary on the most vulnerable, being that we need also probably to be a bit more proactive when it comes to making sure we include more vulnerable groups. in our screener that we do for the random selection, we make sure that there are some questions that are not excluding. So for example, we make sure, for example, if people are not digitally skilled, that they don't feel they cannot participate, that they will be helped, even if they are online session. We ensure that the disabled people can come. We tell them that they will be accompanied, etc. So we have these, and I don't totally agree. There is this idea there were no migrants in the panels, which is not true. I mean, there were people from very varied origin, but maybe it was not that obvious. I don't know, but it was the case. So yes, there might be a need to think about some proactive measure and actually making sure that even if random selection is a much more powerful, inclusive process than a voluntary basis, we still need to make sure that it is as inclusive as possible with all the ways we can imagine. The visibility is one way, because the more people will know about this, the more they will be willing to participate, rather than those who have already an interest or curiosity for that. But there might be also some more proactiveness to do on some aspect to make sure that we really include also more vulnerable categories of society. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
If I may just react really quickly to the question of women-only panels. It was not the idea of having only that, it's just having additional panels with only women, because it is really like proven how it is more difficult sometimes for women to advance their opinion when they are in a context with men. It's just a way to be sure that every proposal, every idea is proposed, that they have the places and the spaces to do so. So it's not about just doing that, it's just having this additional panels and see what we can do.
I understood, no problem. It is, as I said, it can be a good idea. I do not share this impression that in the panels of the conference the women felt they couldn't speak. I mean, again, I don't have the data. I will let people like Alvaro, who followed that from an academic point of view, to tell me what happened exactly in the working group. But the feedback we had from the facilitators and what we've seen, the facilitators are there to make sure everyone talk. So I do not have at all this impression that women talk less or were dominated at any point of the process of the panels.
That's
really,
what I've heard,
and this is also the strength of the panels compared to other formats, because of this facilitation. Yeah,
I think we can also have other ways of doing it, just something to add. It's not like to replace, it's really to add. So just
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, we are late, but not too much. And yet, I think we really had the space to exchange ideas, and very interesting ones. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for being there, and of course all the panelists for everything you said and bring to the table. It was really fascinating. Thank you very, very much. Yeah, indeed, it was quite stimulating. We have a lot of ideas to come back to. And in order to come back to all these ideas, again, we are giving you a rendezvous for the next events and debates with Gender 5+ and the EuGendering chair. And thank you very, very much to everyone, and have a very nice evening. See you soon. Bye-bye. Thanks again.
Thank you to everyone.
Thank you.